Research done by a consultant in the construction industry, seen exclusively by 5Live, shows that 95% of small businesses in the sector are not being paid on time by taxpayer-funded projects. Dominic Laurie is here from 5Live Money. Dominic, it's an extraordinary story.
It's a massive number, that is it?
Yeah, there's a big disconnect between what government policy is with what seems to be happening on the ground. Let me tell you, I've had it reiterated to me in the last hour from the Department of Business what the government policy is. We want the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills to consider introducing a mandatory code for larger firms which commits them to displaying their maximum and average payment terms and provide a point of contact for businesses. But the FSB urges the government to pursue all means possible to ensure payments are made within 30 days. That's what the Business Lobby Group wants to happen, and that is what the government says is happening in the public sector. All government construction contracts require subcontractors up to Tier 3 to be paid within 90 days. Right, that's what the government says is happening, and that's what the Business Lobby Group wants to happen across the whole of the construction sector. What we have, though, is a man, Barry Ashmore, who runs StreetwiseSubbie, who we'll hear from in a second, based in Derbyshire, who has done a research of all of his customer base, or lots of his customer base, which has found that 95% of small businesses, specialist contractors, aren't being paid on time by taxpayer-funded projects. One of the issues that you have in the construction sector is you have three parties to a deal. Mm-hmm. You have the government or a council who outsource a big project to a contractor, a large contractor. We've heard a lot of their names, but not really relevant to single out lots of them, outsourcing companies. What they then do is they then subcontract all sorts of bits of work to electricians, man with a van.
A guy that might have maybe one or no other employees.
People that build walls, people that are specialist metal contractors or whatever.
Tilers, whatever it might be.
Indeed. Now, the perception might be that those companies don't have to play by the same rules. But actually, the government is saying to me today that actually, even though they're being subcontracted to, they are also supposed to be paid within 30 days.
That's clearly not happening.
So that seems to be just not happening here at all.
Well, let's talk to Barry Ashmore. Barry, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about your findings.
Inviting me along today. Well, StreetwiseSubbie.com continue to do our annual survey because literally thousands of specialist contracting companies are being forced into insolvency each year as a result of these poor payment practices. Now, we reckon this is a very credible and authoritative survey of 216 substantial businesses. Just to contradict a little bit of what you were saying earlier, 78% of the people who did our survey had a turnover in excess of £1 million, with some 14% in excess of 5 million turnover. So these are quite substantial companies.
Right.
Okay.
So they're not just
they're not
small
just the man
sole
with a
traders.
van.
Okay,
no.
grand.
And also the talk of down to Tier 3 on a construction project, you might be going down to Tier 10 and beyond.
Right.
So there's lots of layers of subcontracting.
Barry, is this a particular issue in the construction industry? Is it wider than that?
No, I think it's particularly prevalent in the construction industry because of the complexities of the payment process and also of the contractors, the Tier 1 contractors, who are so undercapitalised that they can't afford to pay properly. That's one of the real problems.
So, Barry, if someone's listening who's in this exact situation, that they haven't got their money, they're not being paid, they're struggling to pay their own bills, what advice is there? What do they do? How do they recover that money?
Well, it rather depends on the contractual situation in which they find themselves. We have a lot of free information on our website at StreetwiseSubbie.com. We also provide a nationwide network of consultants who can help them on a professional basis with a payment problem. So we'd need to look at each individual case.
Okay. Mike Cherry's with us as well. He's from the Federation of Small Businesses. What would your advice be, Mike?
Well, I think first and foremost we need to be actually making sure that in these public sector contracts that everybody in the supply chain actually has the same clause written in as the Tier 1 suppliers who are paid promptly, so that the Tier 10s, as Barry is suggesting, actually do get their money on time. And
so is this a legal issue? Does there need to be a change in the law, essentially, for that to happen?
Well, I don't think there does actually need to be a change in the law. Because
is it clarification then, is it?
Well, let's not forget, we actually had the EU directive transposed into UK law back in March 2013, so the legislation is actually there.
Right.
What isn't happening is that the contracts between the main tier 1 supplier and the rest of the supply chain aren't being passed through, and that leads to all sorts of problems. And
So
of course,
people are breaking the law, Mike.
they are indeed breaking the law, but we've
Are they
got
getting fined for it?
No, they're not.
Right.
This is the problem. It is the enforcement of it that is not happening, and government has a huge role to play here, we believe, in making sure that the terms are passed down through the supply chain. And if the tier 1s are not honouring it, or any of the others are not honouring it, then they have to stop them having any future contracts until they can abide by what's in the EU directive.
Mike, can you give us some examples of how this is actually affecting some of your members?
Well, ultimately, I mean, Barry made the very right point that, businesses are being put out of business by this, but this isn't just a problem in the construction industry. This is a far wider issue that is affecting all small businesses. And one of the things that highlights this so well, unfortunately, is the fact that back in 2008, at the start of the credit crisis and the recession, we had the figures from banks actually saying that it was £18 billion that was owed in late payment. Last year, that figure had increased to 33 billion or thereabouts. This year, would you believe, that figure has now gone up, not down, up to 46 billion pounds, and that's despite the prompt payment code that the government's introduced. That is despite the supply chain initiative that they support, and this is an abuse of their suppliers.
Well, Tripti Guyan's with us as well. And Tripti, you run a physio practice in Nottingham, and you had a problem with a late customer. Tell us how that worked.
Yes, this occurred last year, so it was about 18 months ago. I was approached by a new medical intermediary, and they are the bodies that that solicitors and clients go to for them to supply their clients with physiotherapists. So they've got a central network of physios that they can send work to.
Okay.
And this was a relatively new company that approached me, and I did all my homework, as I usually do, with regard to their background, and actually met with one of the directors as well. And they were sending a lot of clients my way, and anyone in the physio practice knows that when you're dealing with medical intermediaries, there is a lot of admin work involved, sort of reports going back and forth. And I fulfilled all my obligations my end, but when it was time to get paid, what was initially agreed to be a 30-day payment cycle got put back to 60 days and then 90 days. And it got to a point where it was a four-figure sum that was accumulated over about 3 months.
And so that potentially could have affected your business very badly.
Absolutely.
Did you worry about going out of business at the time, Tripti, or were you okay?
Not so much at the time, because luckily I don't put all my eggs in one basket. There was work from other companies coming in, and also from cash paying patients. But I was really, really concerned that was this company in financial trouble, and would I ever get payment? And also,
did you get paid in the end? How long did it take in the end?
I did get paid in the end, but only going through the route of the small claims court.
So you had to go to court to get your money in the end?
I didn't actually get to court. What I issued,
You started proceedings and then they paid you, did they?
Absolutely. I started proceedings, and it was the advice of the my union solicitors and the FSB
that was enough.
Was able to help and actually encourage me to go down that route.
Tripti, can we bring in Arnab Dutt as well, who's from Texane, a company based in Market Harbour in Leicestershire that makes wheels and components, actually the wheels for London Underground escalators, among other things. So when you go on the escalators next, that's down to Arnab's company. Arnab, thanks for joining us on Afternoon Edition. How common is it for you to wait a long time? I mean, Tripti was talking there about 90 days or more. Do you have to wait that long for payments sometimes?
Good afternoon, everyone. Certainly, with some of our foreign multinational contractors, suppliers, and we will pay them on their terms. But certainly with the customers, we tend to find there's a culture of 90 days plus, and there's very, very little we can do about that, especially as we are trying to get to these export markets, as we are promoting manufacturing abroad as a small SME. We're trying to export.
So in addition to not getting that money, are you having to spend your time chasing that money with phone calls and emails and getting other people involved?
inevitably, that is the case, and it's onerous and it's time consuming. And I think Mike's hit it on the head. We have some major problems, and I think Biz can do more. Certainly in terms of naming and shaming. I think it would be great to have an anonymous reporting structure to the Department of Business where we could actually anonymously report the worst offenders.
Well, Dominic, do you think that that's a possibility? And also, let's not forget that these are by and large taxpayer-funded projects.
But there's such a disconnect between the law and what's happening. And I think part of the problem is that if you're in a situation like these two, Tripti and Arnab, that we've just heard of, what's their incentive to blow the whistle? If they are a small contractor or even a medium-sized contractor and they're having to deal with a big private contractor that works for government in their region and they want to carry on working for the next 2 or 3 years, are they going to seriously take the source of their income to court? Under the current structure, that's not going to happen, because unless you have perhaps anonymous reporting, or unless the government goes further perhaps, which it doesn't do at the moment, but actually mandate a certain payment time limit for invoices, what the government's policy will be at the moment for the next year is to bring in just publicising what the company's policy should be.
Yeah.
But
it's not really enforcing the law.
They're not really enforcing saying all invoices to all companies has to be paid within 30 or 45 days.
Let's just briefly talk about these middle companies where the problems seem to be. What's in it for them? Holding on to all of this money?
Well, it's acting like a bank, essentially.
It is a bank.
A line of credit?
They are a bank. I mean, because what happens is that the local council or the government pays some of these companies, where sometimes they're a man with a van, but as Barry was saying, sometimes they're bigger. They get paid immediately by the state entity, but then they can hold off paying smaller companies for 45, sometimes 60 days, even though government policy is that they shouldn't be. So, yeah, they're getting free credit lines for 2 months.
Franklin has texted the show. Franklin, welcome to Afternoon Edition. What's been happening to you? What's your experience?
We just find it difficult to get paid from some of the larger contractors. For example, we've done some work on network rail projects for large civil engineering firms, and sometimes it's like getting blood out of a stone. Just excuses, the chain in which you have to go through when you submit an invoice.
And Don was talking about the fear of losing work. And one thing you mentioned is that that adding of interest to a bill. I mean, even if you do that can almost frighten you when you resend the invoice with the interest added on.
Well, that's it. Yeah, we're aware that we can charge interest on invoices that are late, but the fear is that they're going to say, well, we're not going to do.
Have you ever been threatened? Have you ever been threatened that you'd be cut off their the base of workers that they'd work with?
We've never sort of been brave enough to actually go down that route for that fear of it happening.
And that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? It's the fear factor, Franklin. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Tell me, are you worried about? I mean, obviously you're worried about losing business with them, but we spoke to Tripti, who was saying she's not ever put all her eggs in the one basket for fear of going out of business. Has that ever been a concern for you, not actually having enough money to carry on because these big guys are letting you down?
Well, it puts pressure on us because we have to pay our supplier. Luckily, our client base is quite broad, so we're covered on that base. But if we
do you always pay your supplier on time?
We do.
Depends if you're being paid on time, I guess.
Well, it feeds down the chain, doesn't it? Yeah.
That's it. And effectively, we're bankrolling these large projects.
Franklin, thanks very much indeed for calling in to us. I just want to go back to Barry. Barry, what's the answer for you? What needs to happen here? Do we need law enforced, a change in law? Do we need these transparency things to happen? How hard does the government need to come in and react to this?
I think what needs to happen is, I would disagree with Mike, I'm afraid. I do think there needs to be a simple change in the legislation. I think the government needs to stop prevaricating, stop ignoring the facts. This is a real problem. It's a national disgrace. They need to stop producing meaningless reports, stop pretending that these toothless payment charters are the answer, because they're not. For the third year in a row, 84% of our respondents said that the existing remedies do not work. We need new legislation, and we need it now. It would be a very simple matter. This is something that I spoke to Biz about. We had a long meeting with them in London.
Okay.
It could be very simply achieved.
Mike, Barry says it's a national disgrace.
I agree with that, but again, it comes back to the age-old problem. It's the enforcement, not the fault of the legislation that is already there. And I would just highlight one thing. The Cabinet Office does have mystery shopper. You can report things with the idea of late payment or any other.
What do you think about that, Barry?
issues.
Mystery shopper, is that going to sort it out?
Doesn't work. Tried it with 2 clients. It doesn't work. The government, the people who got involved just simply talked and talked and talked, and in the end they said, well, actually, the contractor disputes your invoices, and therefore we can't get involved any further. It's a waste of time.
Barry, thank you. Barry Ashmore from StreetwiseSubbie, Mike Cherry from the FSB, Tripti Guyan and Arna Dutt. Finally, back to you, Dominic. Final word.
I just need to say what the government's statement on this, just overall when it comes to contractors in general. For too long, Department of Business says too many companies have been getting away with not paying small suppliers on time. Through the Small Business Enterprise and Employment Bill, the government will be making it compulsory for large and listed companies to publish information about their payment performance. So that's the transparency thing you were talking about, specifically about the construction industry. They say, we're also taking specific action to help businesses in the construction supply chain get what they're owed on time, regardless of whether they work on a public or private sector project. And this is the nub of it. All government construction contracts require subcontractors up to Tier 3 to be paid within 30 days. Now, as we've heard, Tier 3 is a certain size of company. It's actually quite a big company. What happens to the other companies below that in the supply chain? I think that's probably where this story goes on next.
Does
the legislation go far enough?